So the day is done, and I'm driving home, and I want to tell you a little bit about the day. There was certainly its own version of craziness. When I arrived, I was anticipating and kind of hoping it would be a quiet day, and I think most of us who work in the ER are somewhat superstitious and feel like if you tempt fate, it comes back and bites you. If you say that the ER is quiet, then it fills up. So as soon as I walk in thinking that today's going to be an easy day, of course it's not. The first patient that I had ended up being very, very sick, critically ill, and ended up getting intubated and on the mechanical ventilator because they were not adequately breathing. Their oxygen level was low, and I don't want to go into the details of the case, although it was incredibly complicated and not straightforward. But the point of the whole thing is, in this corona time, I have to constantly check my own biases. And any patient that ends up on a vent with all of this stuff in the media and the medical literature and everything, we're thinking, like, of course, the whole time, all of us in the ER are thinking that this is coronavirus. You know, I walked into work today, and like the first thing I said was, what are we doing now with testing? What's the deal with testing? Where do we send it? How long does it take? Who are we testing? How many do we have? And then the second one is, what's the deal with the PPE? What are the rules here? You know, can we reuse it? Do we not? What room are we doing it in? For which people are we putting in what kind of isolation with what symptoms? And how much risk do they need to go into, bed 3 and get the whole thing, like, have we had any patients? How many have we had? It's kind of like getting the status of where are we with this whole thing. And so I get in there and I get the lowdown, and it wasn't, minutes before this patient came in that initially didn't look too bad, and then got got into trouble very, very quickly. All of a sudden, you come in and your oxygen level is okay, it's fine, and then things can change. God, life can change in a moment. That's why I called it that podcast. She got very, very sick, and we had to put her on the ventilator. As we were preparing to do this, it happened within minutes, where the patient got sick and got bad and made the decision to intubate. But there's still a minute or two of preparation. In the room, there's been a lot of discussion about how during intubation of potentially a coronavirus patient, which is what we were worried about, is a potential increased exposure to everyone in the room. Me, 2 nurses, respiratory therapist. When we put somebody on a breathing tube, nurses give them a medication to knock them out, to sedate the patient because it's very uncomfortable, and then you give them a medicine that paralyzes their whole body, but it prevents them from vomiting, because when you pass the tube through the vocal cords into the trachea, sometimes it triggers a gag response. People can vomit. That can get into their lungs, and they can get very, very sick from that. So we give typically these 2 medicines, one to sedate, the other one to paralyze, and then you intubate somebody. That's given by nursing. We had a second nurse available, and then the respiratory therapist is the specialist that really manages the vent and the tube and all of those details. The doctor doesn't do that. We put the orders in and we specify how much oxygen and how fast and all the settings, but really the respiratory therapists manage the ventilators. And so everybody, recognizing that this was a potential corona patient and that we were intubating, which is one of the highest risk things we can do, so we put all the garb on, which was eye shields, the N95 mask, this is the time that you get it out and use them. Yellow gown and gloves and all this to minimize exposure. Then I looked around at the team and I checked in with everybody. Hey, how do you feel about this? Personally, for me, I feel like I've already been exposed, gone through this, and I'm immune. So for my own self, I'm not worried about my own risk. But I know that people on the team were very worried, and I could see with them. So I said, hey, look, stand back, stay away. I'll do the brunt of the job, and I want to do what we can to minimize the exposure to you. And I know people have families they go home to, and some folks themselves are older and are at risk. Some people's families have some people have families with older partners who have cancer on chemotherapy, and they're worried that and rightly so, that if they bring something home and it takes their partner, how awful that would be. And these are the thoughts that are passing through your head, through everybody's head. And this particular person shared this with me, and I kind of found out later, some people aren't going to come back to work, and I don't judge that. I mean, for good reason. That would be hard to live with if I brought something home to someone I loved and they got sick from it, very sick or died. This is all the stuff that kind of runs through your head before we're doing this life-saving intervention. I mean, this is part of the shit of coronavirus. I will say that, and so there's some equipment. Some people talk about putting a drape over the patient, and to some kind of almost like a shower curtain over the patient as you're placing the breathing tube in past the vocal cords into the trachea. I'm going to question this. I think this is a really funny thing. This particular patient was breathing very heavily in respiratory distress beforehand, breathing respiratory particles everywhere. Just being in the room with this patient was, if they had corona, and I don't know if they did, a potential exposure. When we gave them the medicine that sedated and paralyzed them, the patient, for temporarily stops breathing. We give oxygen and continue to deliver oxygen during the process. There's a very temporary period where, a matter of seconds, when you're placing the tube, where the person isn't getting oxygen, but that's fine. People tolerate that. Unless you get into trouble and can't get the tube in, then you have to stop and give them oxygen to make sure that they get through it okay. But the point of this is, in the moment that we intubate, which went very smoothly without complication, there was no coughing, the patient's not breathing. And I'm looking at this and I'm questioning, why are we so afraid of the act of intubation? Because if it goes well, to me it seemed like there was less exposure. The patient was no longer expiring and coughing and breathing those respiratory droplets out into the room, into this environment. And then as soon as we get that tube, down into their trachea, past into their throat, and we inflate the little plastic bag and seal that off, there's no more respiratory, it's all contained in that system. It's all contained in the ventilator. There's no more air escaping the lungs out into the environment. And so I find, from the moment that we give them the medicine until the tube is in, it's really, in this case, to me, it was not a very high-risk procedure. If they're I could imagine if they were caught, whatever. This is just my reflection on it. So here I was thinking, okay, this is going to be an easy shift. It's not here yet. So the emotions are high. And I roll in, And all of us are discussing this, and we're talking about, wow, this patient was young, and oh my goodness, maybe this is corona, and we kind of talk about later on, as we get all of the tests back and the results and the labs and everything, it becomes more clear that the cause of the patient's respiratory failure was probably not coronavirus. And I want to leave it at that without really getting more medical into that. And I bring this case up because so much of what we do in the ER triage-wise, I'm really trying to be conscious and aware of the biases of the stuff on the brain, of hearing, oh wow, shit's so bad in New York, it's going to come here and be bad. And I could have believed that and reinforced it, but really reality was, and I'm going to tell you about a couple other patients who came in and were worried they had it, and the kind of things that we talked through, which I think are totally reasonable that people are wondering about. Patients are worried. I'm thinking, does everybody have it? The more that I read, the more that I learn that these typical symptoms of cough and fever of coronavirus, it's true, people who have coronavirus can have cough and fever, many of them do, but there's also been so many case reports where people come in only with a headache, or people come in with vomiting and abdominal pain. I had a patient with vomiting and abdominal pain. We talked about, should we do the test or not, and this person worked in, had a job that he wanted to continue to go and do, but he was a good person. He didn't, he was genuinely thinking about other people, and he didn't want to expose them, and he wanted to get tested to know, because he needed to work. He needed the money. Welcome to real life. And so there's this dilemma of, I need this test so that I can go back to work. And and I support that. So when people come to me, then I am willing to give that test. There's always pushback about, is that clog jamming the system? Like, does that mean that other patients who are sicker, more critically ill, aren't going to get their test because they're waiting in line behind somebody who isn't? There's all these issues of basically rationing because we don't have this testing, even though I would validate this person's concern, his desire to work. I think that's a reasonable reason. You're a brilliant doctor. I think that's a good reason to want to get a test. And another patient came in who had some symptoms, respiratory symptoms, and was concerned about his elderly mother. Are his symptoms exposing her, continuing to expose her? And he wanted to get a test to know. I don't think these are unfounded or unnecessary reasons to get testing. I think these are people that get it. They're right on. And it's difficult to be at this place right now where we don't have this quiet. I think hospitals and systems are doing their best. I'm not bad-mouthing my hospital by any means, but I do feel that a lot of us doctors think that it would be a better system if we had more available tests for these practical examples of good people trying to do the right thing and caring about the people in their life that they come into contact with. These are people that are taking it seriously. That's a lot of what I'm doing during the day, is talking to people and listening to their symptoms and like how wide of a net do we cast? Is every headache a corona headache potentially? Is every cough, is every sniffle, is every runny nose, is every little ache on the back? Where do you draw the line with testing and not testing? I'll be able to tell you more. I don't have all the answers. It's a conversation I have with each patient, and that we all do, and we try to figure out what's best for them, and at the same time do what's best for the system, being that this is where we're at, and that this is the reality. I don't know if that patient had corona or not. I'm much, that sick patient in the beginning, I'm less convinced. The more I think about it, the more I think that I was initially leading myself down the wrong path with that. And this is not New York City. Everything in New York City, I think, it's like during flu season when everybody's coming in with the flu. It's more likely that headaches and body aches and coughs and sore throats and fevers and stuff are influenza, but we're not in California. It still isn't corona season, so it would be foolish of me to be applying New York City prevalence of corona to this environment. This ain't it. Not yet, anyway. Still got to try to practice good medicine. The last couple patients at the end of the day were children, a couple of young boys under 10, one after the other, that had big cuts in their legs from bikes and accidental trauma. They were fine. I had the white coat, and underneath it was Superman, and it's one of my favorite things to unbutton that thing and bust out of that coat with the Superman, because kids are afraid. They hate needles. Hell, I hate needles. Both of these kids were so afraid of the needle and the stitches, and I even talked with one of them, and so were the parents. Parents hate seeing their kids suffer like that. There's a good topical medication called lidocaine, epinephrine, tetracaine. Maybe I don't even know what the T stands for. So you can soak the wound, the laceration, with that, and it can help to relieve. It can help to numb it without giving a shot. These ones were so big that I additionally had to do local injections into the wound to numb the whole thing, and that's what the kids, rightly so, were afraid of. The key part of that is the child knowing and experiencing that it does hurt, but that remembering it'll go away, it'll go away, it'll go away, it'll last 10, 20 seconds, and it'll go away, and it'll be numb, and you can do it. And not getting trapped in that eternal moment of pain when it does hurt. That's the worst thing about all of these emotions and feelings and anything, is the feeling that it won't end. That's a huge source of the anxiety, in addition just to the fear. So we did a great job. Both of these kids did great, and both of them, I think this stuff is fascinating, but both of them said it wasn't nearly as bad, the shots, as they were worried it was going to be. So many things like that in life and for us. And, they gained confidence. It's like, look, that wasn't so bad. You're tougher than you thought. You survived. You got through this. If you can survive this, you can survive more. It's a real confidence builder to get through that. We do as much as we can to minimize the pain that children go through. I'm not saying that, we should put them through painful things so that, I think it should be minimized. That said, for these cases where sedation is not worth the risk and we can do the right things, use partially numb it with topical stuff, completely numb it with a couple shots, and then put the stitches in really painlessly and effortlessly. That's the way to do it, and kids can grow from this. There can be good that comes out of it. My favorite part is, after we get through the first few injections, because sometimes the wound takes several injections with the needle, but my favorite part is by the end they can't feel it, and some of them will watch me injecting the wound. I know it sounds a little gory and a bit much, but some of these kids will watch me inject the wound, and a little bit like magic, like a little kind of like I won't believe it until I see it. But the relief of their anxiety when they see that they are out of pain, when they experience that it wasn't as bad as their fear, is a really cool, like satisfying doctor moment that we've gotten through that fear and the pain of the injection, and now it's gravy. We can put the stitches in, take care of the kid. So I want to end on that note, because today I'm not going to tell you about 15 cases of me intubating sick people that all died. The one case we had, I don't even think was corona, even though we sent the test and did all of the everything right and all of that stuff. I think it's important for those of us that are in this, me included, to include corona as a possibility, but also not get too biased, not get too carried away with what we expect to see, but actually just to look at it as objectively as possible. We all have our biases, being aware of that stuff, and do our best to take into account all of the information, do the appropriate tests, like not get so corona crazy. There's an interesting feeling of calm, and I feel really present when I'm in the ER working, because it demands all of my attention, when I'm very easily distractible by so many things in other realms. I allow myself to get distracted when I'm at home doing 5 different things at once. And so it was actually interesting to, as I was walking into the ER, it's almost like it's a safe place for me. It's almost like I feel more anxious when I'm not in the ER, which kind of doesn't, I don't know if that makes any sense. It's almost like there's a calm, or maybe it's like an empowered feeling. I don't know what it is, but it's like you walk in, and I've been hearing about this stuff, and it's unknown, and what's it going to be like, and is it going to be bad? And then I walk in and I look around, and the ER's empty, and things are okay. And I remember, like, God, I've been doing this over a decade. Like, I know what to do. And when I don't know the answer, or I'm not sure, then I can always phone a friend and a consultant and have people help me figure it out. It ain't like I know it all, but I've done this a lot, and there's a funny, it just kind of struck me today as feeling, I felt more anxious at home about my own fear of what may or may not happen, and the uncertainty in the ER. And then when I'm in the ER, I feel totally the opposite. Like I feel completely in control and calm. And so I think it's not surprising that, I don't know if other docs feel that way, or nurses, but I think for me, however long this corona season lasts, I'm going to feel the most. I'm going to feel the best being in the ER, if that makes any sense. I got a friend kind of sent me a website in the email, etc., to apply to help New York Presbyterian, because they're in need of doctors. And I filled the thing out. I don't know if it's going to work out. I certainly am not going to abandon my job in California, but if I have time and they still have a need and it works out and things aren't crazy in California, I'd fucking go, man. I'd jump into that. I'd contribute. I think that would be I think I would feel pretty special to be a part of really, running into the building on fire, that you had an opportunity and you served in the greatest way. I don't know, it just seems like something that to do that and to be a part of that, will always stay with you for your entire life, and you can always feel good about that. I find that to be inspiring, and I think a lot of us maybe not say it, may not say it, may not think it, but I do think there is a very fulfilling and satisfying part to responding to this calling right now, and to be really needed in this time. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'll keep you posted on if the New York thing happens, or if I get needed in California and end up picking up more here and helping out here. I'm going to cut this one off here. This week we've got some good episodes. I want you to check out the interviews that I've done with Dr. Jane Janab. She's another ER doctor I went to med school with. She's one of my favorite people. We just have good conversations about this. I love Jane. I think she was on the show yesterday. Check that one out. It's on this podcast if you're listening to the audio, and it's also on YouTube and Facebook. Susie Zen is a therapist, and we talk about trauma. We talk a lot about trauma. We talk about how to mentally get through this. She has a lot of patients that have prior traumas, eating disorders. We talk a lot about social connection and routines. We're going to later have a whole episode devoted to the healthcare worker and how to get through this difficult time, especially in light of her experience with September 11th. Check out the episode with Jessica Sims, who's also an ER doctor who has an MPH, public health. We really get into a lot of talking about what we really should be arguing, what we should be working for as physicians, kind of what the big picture healthcare system, how our American system is resulting in the current corona situation. That was a really good one, so check those out. So anyway, I hope these are worthwhile for the folks that are wondering what it's like in California. We're certainly on the front lines, but not like New York. So thanks for listening. I'll keep you posted. Take care of yourself. Keep doing your part. We're going to get through this thing.